Welcome to Film Chats podcast, conversations with Ottawa's film, TV, and media community, presented by Digi60 Filmmakers Festival. I'm your host, Olivia Kiryk-Clutterbuck, and on today's episode, I'll be talking with Sonia Bonspille Boileau. She is an Indigenous filmmaker. For this episode, she not only brings her vast education from both real-life application and also studying film, but she also brings her experiences as a woman, as an Indigenous woman in Canada, and as someone who speaks both English and French. I really enjoyed talking with her. I learned a lot. It was a very uplifting conversation, and I hope you feel inspired. Enjoy.
Thank you for joining us today, Sonia. When did you know you wanted to get into visual storytelling?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. Well, I guess there's two parts to that answer. The first part is I come from a small Mohawk community called Gunnesadage. A lot of people know it as Oka. And when I was growing up, I could see how the media would portray Indigenous people, both in the news, but also in media in general. So in on television, in films. And I always knew that what they were portraying on screen or various types of storytelling wasn't really accurate. It wasn't very representative of what even I was, seeing with my own eyes. And there was an event in 1990 called the Oka Crisis in my community, and that really showed me the power of media because I could see events unfolding during the day, and then I would watch the news, or there were these skits on comedy shows and things like that, and the way things were twisted and the way we were portrayed, I thought, okay, media is really powerful. It can actually tell people how to perceive an entire population, And then I've always been interested in film. When I was a kid, that was my favorite activity, was going to the video store, because back then, I'm old. So back then we had video stores. So my favorite activity...
I remember those.
Okay. That was my favorite activity, was to rent movies for the weekend. So basically I was very involved in theater in high school and things like that. And I decided to take those two things, the fact that I really wanted to change the way people perceived Indigenous people, that and my love for film, and just kind of pushed them together and decided to study film production.
That's really cool. And I love that it became something so personal, with wanting to help with representation as well. What was your first creative project, and what did you learn from it?
Oh boy. Well, besides theater, because I did a lot of theater in high school, and at first I was acting, and then when I started, because I'm from Quebec, right, so I go to Cégep after high school. So when I was in Cégep in performing arts, I realized that I really preferred telling people what to do rather than be on stage and act. So that's when I was like, people make a living out of this, right, directing? And then when I told people in my community that that's what I wanted to do, I was very fortunate to have a wonderful support system in Gunnesadage. So the education center there really helped me trace this path of getting into film school. But they knew that it was hard to get into, especially Concordia film productions, hard to get into. So they really supported me in creating summer jobs where I'd have to create, let's say, a PSA for the community, for the health center. So that would be my summer job was to write a PSA, direct it, and learn how to edit it. So they put that together for me. So those were my first, it was a creative process, but it was guided by a summer job. But then to actually get into film school, I needed a portfolio, and my community helped me go to France, to Paris, actually, for an entire summer to study with the New York Film Academy. And I made a 10-minute short film on 16 millimeter. So I got to work with film, which was amazing. And we edited on these the old Steinbeck machines, that you're actually cutting and splicing. So that was my real first creative project where, I actually made a 10-minute, fictional, I guess, silent film. And it was amazing. It was awesome.
That's really cool. I love that your community was also backing you the whole time. That's really special. so many people don't have that. They have the complete opposite where they're trying to talk them out of it. So that's just beautiful. You've had projects ranging from documentary, children's programs, and dramatic features. Where do you get your inspiration from for these projects?
I guess it actually usually comes from around me and my own life. I don't think I'm I don't want to say creative enough because it sounds so negative, but I'm not one of those people that can like imagine these like really huge stories that are very far away from self. I usually start writing about something that is very close to me, that either I want to see on screen or something that's bothering me. Like a lot of the documentaries or even the fictional films that I've done are about themes that like literally like keep me up at night. So it's a way of, it's almost cathartic in a way to write about them. It's to get that either the pain out or the questioning out. And so I guess that's where most of the work comes from, for documentaries and for well, socially driven documentaries and for my fictional work. For kids shows, it was a collaborative creation, and I had just become a mom. Actually, I became a mom during that series that I did. So that also was very close to me because I wanted to create content that I know that my kids would enjoy. So like it was like motherhood guided me, but at the same time I created that, and then I became a mother. So that was pretty cool. So I never go very far from my own self and my own like life to create stuff. So I guess in that sense, it's I guess everything that I do has a little bit of a cathartic method or whatever to it.
Hey, it works. From what I've seen, I haven't gotten to watch all your stuff, but I was able to watch a couple things, and I was like, oh my God, I love it. I watched Rustic Oracle with my mom the other day, and we were both just blown away by that film. It was beautifully shot. The actors, especially Ivy, I'm forgetting the actor's name
Lake.
off the
Her
top of
name's
my
Lake.
head. Lake. Yeah. We were both blown away by her, like just how much she carried the film at such a young age. And Carmen Moore's performance as the mother was it was breathtaking to watch. And my mom told me to tell you she thinks everyone should watch it. It should be mandatory for every Canadian to watch that film.
Oh, well, tell your mom I said thanks.
I will. Yeah, she was just like, and I have to agree with her, honestly. I don't think the general public thinks enough about what families go through. And I also love that you filmed it in your home community where you grew up, which was really nice. When you were writing that, did you have actors in mind already when you were writing the script, or did you have to just go through the regular audition process? What happened for that?
A little bit of both, actually. When I started writing, I didn't necessarily have anyone in mind, but as I was developing Susan's character, played by Carmen, there's all these little hints that like pointed towards Carmen. Some of them I wasn't even aware of at the time, but I realized that like there was this like natural feistiness to the character that was very much inspired by Mohawk women in general. And Carmen's not Mohawk, but she still has that like same kind of like energy and edge. And I had seen her in like Blackstone and other things. And she, at one point, I was going through like all the other things that she has done before, and I realized that in Blackstone, her character's name is Leona, and my mom's name is Leona, and it's not a very common name. So I was like, this might be a sign. And then when I spoke to her at first, she said, oh, I can't believe the character's name is Susan because my mom's name is Susan. And I was like, okay, this is meant to be. We're meant to work together on this. But I did audition a lot of people, a lot of amazing Indigenous women who are super talented. But I kind of already knew that Carmen was the person that I wanted, and she fell in love with the script, and she said yes right away. And then we did a lot of auditions for IV, and we had like a sort of like a top 5, I guess, that we called back for a second round of auditions. And the thing with Lake that was absolutely amazing is she had the natural ability to play off the person that was giving the lines, play off whatever they were giving. So a lot of kids, when they prepare for auditions, they learn it by heart, they practice it, rehearse it with their parents, and whatever they rehearsed at home is what they're going to give you in audition, right? Because it's kind of like set in stone. It's like their comfortable way of delivering it. But with Lake, she was so playful, and if I asked the actor giving the lines to play it like, I don't know, more angry or whatever, she would automatically jump in and feed off of that. And she was only 8 years old, and I was like, wow, she's this little powerhouse. And we clicked right away. And so the last step that I needed to do before actually officially offering her the role was to have a conversation with her mom and make sure that her mom was comfortable with because they had the scenes, but they didn't have the full script. So I said, here's a script, read it. We need to have a conversation just to make sure that Lake is comfortable, that you're comfortable, and to give me my boundaries, how much info do I give in each scene? And so Lake's mom became like my best bud on on the set, because she was like, I would turn to her and she would be able to just with a look tell me, okay, this, you can go down this road, but this one might be a little harder to go down. But Lake already knew the heart of the subject matter. Like, she was already very much aware about missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada. There was a murdered woman in her community. She had participated in walks and rallies and things like that already. So she was already very much aware that this is something that happens in our country. So she wasn't starting from like not knowing anything. So that helped, I think, and created a more natural and honest performance in a way.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing I noticed about her, how like her performance and how you wrote the character, was she was a regular 8-year-old kid. It wasn't this 8-year-old who's always like hyper focused or something like you tend to see in films. She was a regular 8-year-old kid. She's bored. She goes outside. She picks flowers, and that was really nice to see. It was really refreshing that way too. What about casting the role of Heather? What was that like?
We also did a whole lot of auditions, and when I met Mackenzie, I fell in love with her honesty, because she came in just like very, like the first thing that she said is like, I'm really nervous, and she was really shy. But then she delivered the scene and she was like, phoom, like super confident, and I was like, you're shy? You don't look shy. So there was just this natural, beautiful honesty about her that I found absolutely captivating. And she was just incredibly bubbly and kind and attentive. And I was like, okay, this is the type of person I want to work with. Because when I cast for any project, personally, I always go for the kind person over talent. I know I'm not sure a lot of directors do that. I think a lot of people go for talent first, but I'm very sensitive to kind people, and I love my job, but I want to work with people that also love their jobs and want to go to work and want to create something, So I always go for the people who are like kind-hearted and really want to tell this specific story with me. And Mackenzie was that. Like, she wanted to tell the story with me. And then I introduced her to Lake, and they became best buds from day one. They still see each other all the time. They call each other sisters. They celebrate birthdays together and Christmas and all those things. They really became a family. They come from the same community. So they come from Ganawage, which is my community's sister community. It's about an hour away. It's just outside of Montreal. And they became best friends. So it wasn't hard for them to play the role of sisters in the film, because They met in March. They hung out from March to August, and we shot in August. And by that time, they were already best friends for life. It was pretty awesome to witness.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, Mackenzie gave another brilliant performance because she's not in the film for very long. It's just like the beginning and then those little chunks throughout, but she has this amazing impact. So yeah, I loved the film.
Oh, thank you.
How do you find, oh, you're welcome. How do you find collaborators?
It depends on the project, but I'm very loyal. I've had the same collaborators for a long time. I shot 2 documentaries and a feature with the same director of photography and almost the same team. The last couple of projects I've done, because they were a lot bigger and there's all these like rules with unions depending on the city where you're shooting and all those things, the teams varied a bit, but they were all people that I knew from something else. Like I knew through either through friends or because I saw them on another project that I had friends working on. And again, same thing. I'll go for kind people first and foremost. So when, like, for example, the drama series that I just shot, I didn't have a director of photography at first. And there's all these amazing directors of photography, especially in Montreal. It's insanely talented. But I didn't, well, of course, at first I was looking at different projects and the camera styles that I liked and the visuals that I found appealing. But then in that list, I would check out the names and then I would go around and talk to everyone that I know in the industry and say, do you know so-and-so? Are they a good person? I'm doing a series on, Indian residential schools. I need these people to be, aligned with my type of thinking. And so then the people are like pointing me towards certain people and this one name kept coming up. And so I ended up meeting this director of photography and he was, yes, I'm in. This is the type of story I want to tell. And similar to me, he was very picky about the subjects that he wanted to work on. And he realized that he didn't want to just make TV to make TV. He wanted to make meaningful content. And I was like, yes, I want to work with you. Meaningful is the way to go. So I guess that's how I approach it now. I go for the people that want to carry these specific stories with me.
That's totally understandable. And I love that you go for kindness first. I think that's really important. It sets a tone for the entire set and the entire length of the production.
Yeah, because when you're going into production, especially like the actual production part shooting, you're going to war, right? You're going to war with people because it's really fast paced. It's hard. You're extremely exhausted. You can't drop a single ball because things can just collapse and there's so much money involved. So you need to have people that are aligned with your way of seeing things. And also, I want every day to be a good day. Like I don't understand people who go into productions on sets where they're just like kind of like yelling at each other and no one's being kind to anyone. I don't understand that. I never want to be in those settings. So I make sure that when I create a project, and even on the very first day, like usually like the director starts off the day with, a little bit of a speech. And I always start with, okay, we are humans. We're just here to tell a story. It's an important story, but it's just a story. So please, be kind and be proud and be happy that we are here together and we have this amazing job and we are not really at war or we are not really, surgeons saving lives. We're telling a story. So keep that in mind when we're speaking to each other, when we're speaking to actors, when we're trying to be productive, but we're trying to be productive all while respecting each other and enjoying the job that we do because we're very lucky to be able to do it. So I usually start off with that, and that kind of sets the tone, and people are like, okay, yeah, she's right. There's no reason to like yell and be stressed and get mad for no reason because of whatever,
Yeah, it's just a nice, kind, peaceful for the busy environment. And you're lifting each other up that way too, which I think is really important. For speaking of raising people up, how do you feel we can broaden diversity and lift up Indigenous creators in this industry?
Yeah, that's such an important question, and I think luckily things have shifted quite a bit in the last, I would say, decade. When I started 15, 16 years ago, there wasn't much room for Indigenous creators at all. Luckily, we had our own broadcaster, which is APTN, the Aboriginal People's Television Network. So that's kind of how I got my foot into the industry and telling our stories. But I even knew then I wanted our stories to be out there for the rest of the world. So luckily, there's these producers and storytellers that knocked on all these funders' doors and said, you need to invest more in Indigenous storytellers, but Indigenous stories told from our perspective, because over the last, 120 some years in cinema and television and media in general, Indigenous stories have been told by non-Indigenous people 99% of the time, which is kind of crazy. Now, luckily, we are accessing funding, or broadcasters are more interested now in our stories because there is this social shift in, the interest and the opening towards diversity, and diversity, all kinds of diversity, but Indigenous people as well. So I think a lot of it at first was because broadcasters and funders felt like they had to. It almost felt like, oh, we'll do our due diligence or whatever. This is what we need to do, especially public funders. But they didn't even realize at that point that there was a genuine interest for these stories. Now, there are films that that are directed or produced by and written by Indigenous teams now that are actually like success stories. They're like great films that are like shining internationally or are selling or, are doing really well on various platforms. So now the funders and broadcasters are like, oh, okay. So these stories, not only do we have an obligation to tell them, but people really want to see them. So there's like more interest now. And I think that that's the case for diversity in general. People want to see different faces. They want to hear different types of voices, and they want stories that are told from different perspectives, different points of view, different cultures, different histories. And because that there's this need for these stories, well, luckily it's about time, there is room for these stories. It's not obviously not perfect yet. There still needs to be more room made for diversity, but at least now there's these paths to get to making our films or making our programs and to get them on screen. Whereas 10, 15, 20 years ago, you really had to, if you had one project, you might spend 7 years trying to fund it. Because there was generally just people slamming doors and saying, no, it's my audience won't like this, without them even knowing if that's true or not. So at least because we've proven that there's an audience for diversity, it's easier for diversity to get their projects out, luckily. So I'm very positive about that because I have definitely seen a shift.
That's good. I know I try to watch as many Indigenous creators or read Indigenous books and stuff as I can. And likewise for other minority groups. Well, you guys aren't really the minority, but anyway.
I get what you mean.
Yeah, but just because it's helping me learn to be a better human being and understand other people's stories that as a white woman, I can't necessarily relate to. And I think after what happened last summer or last spring with the residential school grave discovery, I think more people are starting to think that way too and actually learn a bit more about the past and the people that we've repressed for so long. Hopefully.
Hopefully. I think so because I think it made it more maybe real is not the right word, but I think for people, it was obvious that we can't ignore that collective history anymore. And I like using the word collective history instead of pushing it and thinking, oh, it's this culture's past. No, residential schools and colonization is our collective past, and we need to own it as all of ours instead of just brushing it aside and thinking that it applies to only one certain percentage of the population.
I like that collective past. I'm going to use that from now on. Thank you for that. But yeah, I agree with that. And I like that history is now starting to, it's not getting as whitewashed anymore. We're starting to see that open up, which is really important. And like your films are doing that, are helping with that, as are other Indigenous creators. And I'm just glad it's getting seen and you're not having to fight as hard.
Yeah, that's definitely super important. But I also believe in the power of storytelling as a way of rewriting history. Like I believe in the power of, like I said earlier, media has this power to influence the way we view an entire population. So knowing that, it also has the power to present facts and histories and stories from a different perspective, and therefore put that in the history, in our collective history. It's changing the way that we view our history. So I really believe in the power of storytelling, but I want to say like scripted, like fiction, even more so than documentary, because you're basically you're creating empathy with a population that maybe didn't necessarily have much empathy for this subject. Like when you do a documentary, I've said this before, but when you do a documentary, you already know your audience, and you're already speaking to people that are interested in that subject matter, because no one watches a documentary about something they're not interested in. You're already. So I felt like when I was doing documentaries, I was already like kind of speaking to allies in a way. But with fiction, because you're creating a story and you're creating characters, and your audience is probably going to be wider, because some people will go into it like watching it without really knowing the subtext or the social issues that are in the film. And they just relate to the characters, and they relate on an emotional level. Like for Rustic Oracle, ultimately, it's a story about family. Well, everyone has a family. So any parent on the planet can relate to Susan. They maybe can't relate to what she has to go through and how hard it is for her compared to other people. But the feeling of not knowing where your child is, like any parent on the planet would feel for her on that like basic human level. So I feel like if you're connecting humans that way through emotion, then you can like explain the social aspects of it, and all these other themes can come out because you've already kind of reeled them in with their, you've reeled in their heart. So then you can like feed the mind. That's how I see fiction, and that's why I believe that like fictional scripted storytelling is really, really powerful that way.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Yeah. You're bilingual. How do you think that has affected your creativity, and also has it given you opportunities you might not have otherwise had if you only spoke one language?
Definitely a lot of, advantages. That may be a big word, but for example, my first feature called Le Dep was in French. And when I applied, Telefilm had just created the Talent to Watch program, which used to be called the micro budget. So you're automatically, like, that you're applying for a very, very small budgeted project. But since it was my first feature, I felt that's the perfect way to like get my foot in the industry, in the feature film industry, is with a small budget. Because, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And then I just go back to TV, because I had been working in TV for a while. And on a national level, when you know that the pool is a very, very big pool, but that the French side is a little smaller, I knew I had a better shot of getting funding if I wrote a French script. So it's kind of strategic sometimes, depending on the project, but also I think in both languages. So depending on the subject, depending on the actors I want to work with, depending on my target audience, or even the broadcaster or the funders that I'm going to see, I feel like I'm fortunate to be able to switch from one language to the other depending on where my story fits best in a way. So I really loved working in French for l'EDEP. But then when I wanted to write about missing and murdered Indigenous women, and I knew that I wanted to bring that back home to my community is like 98% Anglophone. So I wasn't going to write another script in French. It made no sense. So I switched to English. And that was really great for distribution and all that side of it too, just to know, okay, so when you make a French film, this is a path that you can take. These are the markets that are interested in your project. Anglophone side, okay, this is, it's a whole other ball game. So it's also interesting in that aspect to be able to work in both, because you see where your projects, how wide a net your projects can, just how far they can go depending on the language that you shot in.
I love how you're able to do that too with, like you said, with the funding. It helped out for your first film, getting the French side because you are more likely to get the funding. This is a question that my mom asked me to ask you. When you're writing in French or English, do you think in the language you're writing in, or do you think in like your first language more so?
I think in the language that I'm writing in, because I do believe that I'm that bilingual. Like I grew up mixing, my dad is Francophone and my mom is like super Anglo. So I grew up with both sides of the brain, just kind of like collaborating with each other. That being said, I think I'm a little bit more articulate on paper in French. So when I am writing in English, sometimes I'll stumble because I can hear the sentence in French, and French has a lot of beautiful words. It's more poetic than it is like straight to the point. English is very straight to the point. So sometimes I have like these metaphors or all these like beautiful sentences in my mind in French, and then I'm trying to figure out how to translate them in English, and they don't always work. So I feel that sometimes I'm a little probably more poetic on paper in French than I am in English. So I think for that reason, I have a little bit of a preference in terms of writing. I like writing in French because of all these beautiful big words that just give more color, especially in a script. When you read a script and it has all these descriptive words, it just adds to the visuals that you can imagine. So I think French has that. It's really beautiful in that sense. But I'm completely functional in both languages, and I absolutely love writing in English as well. So
that's awesome. Were you one of those kids who would, depending on which parent you were talking to, when the family was together, you would just switch between the languages, and then if there was someone else there, you're just like, yeah, this is normal.
This is totally normal. This is what we do, and this is actually still what we do. My kids are perfectly bilingual, and depending on whatever word comes first in their brain, that doesn't matter on the language, that's the word that they're going to use, to a point where they switch within the same sentence. There'll be 3 French words and 2 English words in one sentence, and I've been kind of like fighting to get them to at least complete a sentence in one language. I'm like, we can have a bilingual conversation, but try to make one sentence in one language. And they're like, they can't even, they just go with whatever comes out first. It creates its own little franglais. That's what we call it.
Yeah, definitely. I'm the same way with sign language, where I'll forget the word in English, but I'll do it in sign language in ASL. And then no one else around me knows what I'm talking about because I'm the only one who signs in my house. I love that, though. Is there anything that makes you hopeful for greater diversity and representation in the future of our industry?
Yes, definitely. Well, I guess it's kind of what I was saying a little bit earlier is there's room now for diversity, whereas there wasn't room before. So that makes me very, very, very hopeful. Just like there's more room for women, which, when 20 years ago or 15 years ago, I had like that double strike. I was a woman and I was Indigenous. It was like a no. Now there's like, okay, no, we want to hear these voices. I feel like since the main funders and big institutions understand now that it has to be part of their mandate to allow for more diversity, that definitely helps. That being said, I hope, and this is my hope for the future, I hope that eventually people of diversity won't feel like they have to, tick that box of diversity. They won't have to identify as being different just to access certain funding or certain opportunities. I'm looking forward for the day where we won't have to do that to be seen, that we will just be seen as part of Canada's artistic landscape in general. So, and this goes for like Indigenous creators, for LGBTQ plus, like all these, and visible minorities, which I hate that term, but that's like another thing that you feel like if this is who you are and you see that word and you're like, oh, maybe I'll have a better chance at getting funding. This is what I'm going to tick. This is the box I'm going to check off. It hurts your gut when you're doing it because you feel like, I know my project is good enough no matter what, yet this is the only way that I might get it funded, so I have to do this. And it hurts, but at the same time, this is where we're at now. We need to do that to get these opportunities, but I'm really looking forward to the day where we will just be seen as incredibly talented creators that need to be seen and heard, and we will just be part of the general landscape as opposed to be still being somewhat marginalized.
I love that. Yeah, just being part of the collective whole as a creator instead of needing to focus on that one little aspect of your life. Yeah. You mentioned you're a director, and what has your journey as a director been like? You said earlier you had started with acting and discovered you like telling people what to do, which is what made you do the switch. But what has it been like as a female director for you?
It was hard at first. Very, very hard, because especially as a woman, a lot of decision makers were men, still are, but it was worse, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And so even when you're going out and pitching your projects or trying to get them off the ground, there was always this kind of like attitude or like a little bit of a mansplaining going on, and they always found me. And I'm small. I have a high pitched voice. I look like a kid. And I'm kind of bubbly and all that. So all these things kind of played against me in a way, because it was hard for people to take me seriously. So I felt like after a few years, I needed to, dress a certain way and act a certain way. And it felt very counterintuitive because that's not who I am. But luckily, I met a producer 15 years ago who is now my partner and the father of my kids, and we live together and we do everything together. And he believed in me, and he was like, no, like, you have a voice, you need to be directing, you need to be writing. And he helped me push for a lot of these projects. And looking back, I'm like, I needed a guy to push these projects because they wouldn't listen to a woman. It really, really sucks, But then I proved myself. And after the first few projects, obviously it was much easier to get like a meeting with broadcasters or all these other decision makers. But at first it really felt crappy that they wouldn't trust a woman with a big project. And even to this day, well, I would say in the last 3-4 years it's better, but when you look at statistics from a few years ago, yes, there were more women directing, but they all had smaller budgets. And that's also incredibly insulting. So, okay, there's a door there that's opening, but we're still only going to give you this amount of money compared to this person who's a man who's getting a lot more. There's still like this weird, dynamic with female directors or even female producers, I find, which I'm hoping is going to change. But I still feel very fortunate that I've been able to do what I've been able to do. Like I have all these projects that I've done, but the first few projects, I feel like some of them are like, oh yeah, we'll give her this little amount and see what she can do. And then I had to fight twice as hard to make sure that I could prove that I could do it, than probably a guy would do. Ironically, the when I did Rustic Oracle, it was the first project that I had a fairly big team, like compared to, because when you're doing documentaries, there's like, I don't know, 5-6 people working with you. When you're doing a feature, there's like 50, 60 people working with you. Well, my first feature, there's only 12 because it was a very small budget, but like Rustic Oracle was my first bigger project. And I worked with a couple of guys that were like a set PA and another PA, and they had been working in the industry for like 30 some years. And it was their first time working with a female director. First of all, that's insane. That in 2018 was their first time working with a female director. And one of them said, wow, it's the first time that I'm on a set that people aren't yelling at each other or telling each other off or being pissed. And he's like, I think I realize now it's because you're a woman and that's not the energy that you're bringing to the set. And I was like, see, don't you want to work with women more often now? And he actually said, I think I'm going to work with women from now on. And I was like, yes, tell that to everyone. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Just watching those cultural shifts, man, it's insane. Hopefully now women can actually start getting the same kind of funding that men do.
That's the next step.
Yep. One step at a time. You were fortunate enough to get a lot of education for filming and creating. What was that like? And did it open other avenues for you that maybe if you had been a self-learner, that would have been harder to get to?
Oh man, for sure. I loved my education, especially in film production at Concordia. I learned so much. I like kudos to all the self-taught directors, but I actually almost on a daily still use tools that I've learned in school. Mostly for script writing, I would say. I still have the teacher's voice in my head, giving me all these cues on how to write and how to make sure to be, efficient and clear in your writing. And just structurally, like how to structure a script. Because I'm a firm believer that to break the rules, you need to know the rules first. And I feel like a lot of film schools at least give you those basic rules that then after you can play with. So in that sense, I feel like I learned a lot. Maybe not so much on the technical side of things, because when I was in Concordia, I was like the last cohort, like I was the last gang to still work with film. And I had teachers that was like, film's never going to die. And then I go back 2 years later for like a seminar or whatever. And then everything switched to digital. And I was like, okay, so much for film not dying. That died pretty quick. But at the same time, it gave me a sense of really organizing your stuff before shooting, because when you're shooting with film, you can't just go out and shoot and hope to make sense of it afterwards, right? You're focusing on your shooting ratio, you're focusing on lighting to make sure that it's perfectly lit to not waste any film. So it's made me much more disciplined on a set and much more disciplined in preparation for a project. Like I always come in like super ultra prepared. And I think it comes from being in film school and learning it that way. And just learning to think. I think that's the beauty of university is where you learn how to think and just bouncing ideas off of other people. And just opening your eyes to like different artistic views. Like I didn't know much about international cinema before going to Concordia. I didn't know, this amazing Japanese director, this amazing, Russian director. I didn't know those people, and I didn't have access to that in my little hometown with my small video store in the village where I lived, you know what I mean? So just accessing all of that really opened my eyes for sure.
You're making me really miss those video stores on a Friday night.
I miss them all the time. I talk about it all the time. I talk about it and my kids are like, we have Netflix. We don't know. It's not the same.
It's not the same. I saw this one guy on the internet and they made a video store in his basement. So their son who had Down syndrome, I believe, could go to the video store still because he missed it so much. I'm like, I would want that in my house, to be honest. Do you have any tips or advice for new or established creators?
I think the one advice that really stuck with me, and I still repeat it to myself once in a while, and this I think is more for writing, but write what you know and keep it simple. I think that is really, really good advice. I think sometimes as creators, especially when we're just trying to like get our first thing off the ground, we tend to try to go big and be like ridiculously creative and complex and all these things. And oftentimes that backfires because you need to be clear in what you're trying to achieve. And then you can take all these, it's like a tree, you know. You need to have the tree trunk very steady, very sturdy and clear, and then you can branch out. But you can't just build a tree. The tree won't grow if it's just like branches all over the place from the ground, right? So when you're writing what you know and you're keeping it simple, that allows you to branch out afterwards. So I think for any writer out there, that would be my number one advice. And for directing, trust your gut. That's something that I learned, sadly. I don't want to say too late, but oftentimes late in a project. I'm a team player, so I listen to everyone. But often in the first few projects that I did, I would listen to others a bit too much, even if in my gut it was telling me to do something a specific way or to stick to my original plan. And then you're in the editing room and you're like, oh man, I shouldn't have listened to this person. I should have stuck with my gut. So write what you know, keep it simple. And directors, listen to your gut.
Awesome. I love the tree trunk analogy too.
But it's so true. It's so true.
It's true. Well, and you have to have those deep roots from all your life experiences to make that trunk so that you stay grounded in everything. So it's a beautiful metaphor. I loved it. Do you have any projects coming up you want to plug before we wrap up, or?
Well, I'm actually still in the post-production part of it, but I just finished my first drama series, which is a huge deal. It's big. Well, for me, it's big. It's a 6-part limited series called Pour toi, Flora. It's in French, but it will be eventually dubbed in English, and it will be called Dear Flora. And it's about kids in 1960 that are taken away from their Anishinaabe community in northern Abitibi, and they're sent to a residential school. And then we follow these kids throughout their entire life. So we see them today in a contemporary setting, and they're like parents and grandparents. But we go through the various decades of their lives from, before residential school up until today. So it's a really powerful story about family and resilience and reconnecting and redemption and all these beautiful things. And it'll be on Radio Canada and APTN very soon in May. And I'm on my way to France in 2 days to try it and sell it internationally. Because in France, there's this big event called Série Mania, where all these drama series and documentary series as well, it's like an international market, and you're just basically pitching your project and hoping that it gets picked up somewhere else as well. So I'm doing that, leaving in 2 days, and we'll see how that goes.
That's very exciting. I can't wait to watch it. I'm going to need to learn French very quick so that I can understand what's happening until it's dubbed or something.
Oh, and I do want to add something really, really cool about this series. It's the first series that's also going to be dubbed in an Indigenous language and is going to be available on Radio Canada's platform. So it's going to be dubbed in Anishinaabe, the Algonquin language. And it'll actually be available at the same time as the French version. And this is the first time that a major broadcaster like CBC or Radio Canada is actually doing that. So that's pretty awesome.
That's amazing. Congratulations. That's a big deal. Oh, well done. Oh, that makes me more excited somehow.
I get it for sure, and it'll be subtitled.
Goosebumps.
Yeah, it'll.
I got goosebumps from that. That's awesome. Oh, congratulations!
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for being with us today. And I wish you all the best in France.
Thank you.
Can't wait to hear how that goes.
Yeah, hopefully it goes well. Well, thank you, Olivia, for having me. It was great chatting with you. You're great at this, by the way. I could do this all day.
I hope you enjoyed my talk with director Sonia Bonspille Boileau. A huge shout out to our festival partner, the Digital Arts Resource Center, for sponsoring this series. For more information about the festival, visit digi60.org. And don't forget to engage with us on Facebook at Digi60, on Twitter at Digi60Fest, and on Instagram at Digi.60 to help us keep the conversation going. I'm your host, Olivia Kiryk-Clutterbuck, and I'll chat with you again soon.